Hello everyone, and welcome back to 10-Minute Elections. Today is Thursday, June 25th, 2020, and today's grab bag video will focus on the 2024 Republican primary. I know a couple of weeks back we discussed the Joe Biden sweepstakes on the Democratic side, so today we are going to discuss the Republican side of the 2024 presidential nomination. So, looking ahead before we get into the video, next Monday, I will not be uploading a video, but next Thursday, this is actually a viewer-suggested video. Peter Hamill, huge shout out to him. He suggested that I discuss how the 2020 census will affect the electoral map and how the new electoral map will affect each party's standing. So, the race is on to succeed Donald Trump. There's been a lot of speculation in terms of who could potentially be running across governors, senators, all sorts of people. So let's start off with a couple of governors. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis are the first two. And these two are solid contenders for the nomination right now, really because they could legitimately be competitive whether or not Trump wins in 2020. They've tied themselves to Trump, but not too closely. They both won in 2018, and it's clear that they both have bigger political aspirations. So, Governor Kemp narrowly defeated Stacey Abrams. We talked about that the other week in 2018. But his approval rating has soared since, although it's dipped back down with his handling of coronavirus. And I think that's what could really hurt him. I think his stock has really dropped since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, actually the same, although his response hasn't been hit nearly as hard as Brian Kemp's, but he was looking at pushing on a 70% approval rating in the state of Florida on an election he won by well under 1%, although now, again, that approval rating isn't as high. So, two moderate governors, and these are really the contenders if Trump loses in 2020. These are two governors who supported the impeachment inquiry to Donald Trump. They govern safe blue states, and they have immensely high approval ratings, especially with regard to response to the coronavirus pandemic. Charlie Baker was actually floated as a potential primary contender in 2020 against the president, but he declined. So, moving on, Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton. This has been a name that's come up a lot, and this is one that's certainly controversial. Tom Cotton certainly has some very, very hardline stances on a very wide range of issues. He is known as a bit of a war hawk, and he is famous/infamous now, most recently at least, for the op-ed he got published in the New York Times calling for military intervention against BLM protesters. So, Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley as well, I'll get to him in a minute. These are really candidates that are, again, only going to be strong contenders if Trump wins. If Trump loses, Tom Cotton and Josh Hawley, but really Tom Cotton, have tied their political fortunes so closely to Donald Trump and really rode Donald Trump's coattails through the ranks of their parties and government that if he loses, I really don't see a path for potentially Josh Hawley, but not Tom Cotton to the presidency. So Josh Hawley, he is a Republican senator from Missouri. He defeated Claire McCaskill in 2018, and he has tied himself to Donald Trump, certainly, and has an unusually high profile for a freshman senator. But he is certainly not nearly as polarizing as someone like Tom Cotton. He is an Ivy League law student who has argued cases before the Supreme Court before, so his background really comes in law. So he may seem inexperienced, but really he has held office before the Senate, but he really has his background as a lawyer, and that might help him against someone like Joe Biden. Texas Senator Ted Cruz was someone that seeked the nomination in 2016 and was Donald Trump's last Republican opposition. He was the only Republican who made it to the point where he was choosing a running mate, that being Carly Fiorina in 2016. So Another senator, Florida Senator Rick Scott, he narrowly defeated in certainly a surprise victory in 2018, then incumbent Democratic Senator Bill Nelson by 0.2%. It was a margin of about 10,000 votes. It was being fought in court. That election was very, very close. And Rick Scott doesn't have an exceptionally high approval rating, or didn't, like Ron DeSantis, but senators are going to be a little bit more polarizing than governors, and Rick Scott has essentially made the right allies in Washington such that he could and probably will be a strong contender for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. One more senator I want to talk about, and it is another 2016 candidate, Florida Senator Marco Rubio. This is someone who could run if Trump wins, but I think he's stronger if Trump loses. Yes, he has tied himself to Trump, but not nearly as strongly as a lot of Republicans. Certainly not as strongly as Tom Cotton, and really not as strongly as someone like Josh Hawley either. So he's maintained a level of independence that's largely present due to his presence in politics and in the Senate well before Donald Trump was president. So Marco Rubio, I think, could really usher in the next generation of Republican support. If Republicans want to win in 2024, Marco Rubio would be, I believe, the second strongest candidate, which I'll talk about in a second. We'll get to the strongest in a minute, but I think Marco Rubio would be a very strong candidate in 2024. This one's sort of a wild card. He hails from the state of Kansas, and it is the United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. He might be able to be hit over his handling of the delayed Ukraine aid that resulted in President Trump's eventual impeachment. But, and again, this is someone who's really only going to have a shot if Trump wins in 2020, but it's certainly someone to keep an eye on, although, again, this one's really a wild card. I don't have too much to say about Mike Pompeo. Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump. These are the runs in the family choices. Ivanka Trump is the senior advisor to the president, and Donald Trump, along with his brother Eric, help run the Trump company. So these two I don't really see winning in 2024, especially against someone like Joe Biden. They're interesting to think about, and I think either of them could potentially get the nomination, especially Ivanka. I think Ivanka, if she wants to, would actually be a pretty strong contender for the Republican nomination, but especially just due to her inexperience, I don't really see either of these two winning a general election. All right, these are what I believe are the two front runners right now. If Donald Trump wins, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, this is a name that's obviously been floated a lot, as any vice president is with an incumbent president. If Trump wins in 2020, he'll certainly have the inside path to the nomination, although if he doesn't, it's going to be much tougher for him. We'll have to see where the Republican Party ends up going in the next 4 years with regards to Donald Trump if Joe Biden does indeed win the 2020 presidential election. Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina and UN ambassador. I think that this is going to be the strongest candidate in 2024 in a general election. I believe that the Biden administration, with say about 47 or 48% approval rating, which is what we're about used to seeing from moderately popular incumbents, Nikki Haley would genuinely have a chance, and I think she's really the only one that would. So I don't know how likely she is to get the nomination. I do think she has an inside shot. Whether or not Trump wins in 2020, she's praised him but also kept her distance, so I think that's really going to benefit her. So the candidates with the best chance, I think, to win the general election. Nikki Haley, of course, certainly number one, and Marco Rubio's number two. And I really think these are the two candidates that, frankly, again, if Joe Biden has an approval rating anywhere over 45%, I believe these are the only two candidates that have a chance at winning the election. If Joe Biden has an approval rating around 50 or even 55%, something like Obama, it needs to be Nikki Haley, although Marco Rubio could potentially make inroads with some of those suburban voters the Republican Party lost big in 2018. Ron DeSantis is another one, Charlie Baker and Larry Hogan if the Republican Party wants to go the centrist route. These two are wild cards, Mike Pompeo and Brian Kemp as well. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching, and see you guys in a week.